Corn is no longer just an agricultural commodity. It has quietly become one of the most strategically important resources in the world, shaping energy policy, industrial expansion, and geopolitical influence. For decades, the global corn market was dominated by the United States, supported by predictable yields and unmatched export capacity. But today, the landscape has shifted dramatically. A combination of new technologies, rising industrial demand, and geopolitical shocks has turned corn into a critical pillar of national security, especially for countries like China. Below are the 5 components that define this new phase of global competition. The transition toward biofuels has radically changed how nations think about corn. Ethanol, once a niche product, is now a major component of energy strategies in both developed and emerging economies. As countries seek to reduce dependence on fossil fuels, corn-based ethanol becomes a strategic alternative, flexible, scalable, and politically attractive. For the United States, it provides energy independence. For developing countries, it offers a path to cleaner fuel. This shift means that corn supply is no longer simply an agricultural matter. It is directly tied to energy security. China's economic transformation has driven explosive demand for corn far beyond food consumption. Corn feeds a rapidly growing livestock sector, designed to supply protein to 1.4 billion people. It is also the backbone of industrial production. Bioplastics, chemicals, starches, pharmaceuticals, and renewable materials all increasingly rely on corn. These industries are expanding faster than China can supply them domestically. Yields have plateaued, arable land is limited, and climate volatility threatens production. As a result, China's industrial ambitions directly translate into aggressive competition for global corn supplies. China's need for corn now exceeds what its farmland and climate can reliably produce. This structural imbalance forces the country into dependency on foreign markets, an uncomfortable position for a nation that prioritizes self-sufficiency. The gap widens every year. Demand increases with rising incomes and industrialization, while domestic yields struggle to keep up. This imbalance transforms corn from a market commodity into a strategic vulnerability for Beijing, driving the government to diversify sources, secure long-term contracts, and explore foreign land acquisitions. The trade war between Washington and Beijing revealed the fragility of China's reliance on American agriculture. When tariffs disrupted corn and soybean flows, China faced immediate pressure on feed costs and food inflation. The political unpredictability of U.S. policy pushed China to reassess its exposure to a single dominant supplier. This moment became a turning point. Beijing concluded that agricultural dependence could be weaponized against it. The result was a new strategy: diversify aggressively, invest abroad, and build alternative supply corridors independent of U.S. influence. Corn now sits at the intersection of food security, industrial policy, energy transition, and geopolitical rivalry. Feeding China's population, sustaining its manufacturing base, and powering its growing bioenergy sector all depend on steady corn access. For Beijing, this cannot be left to the volatility of global markets or the political decisions of other countries. This is why China is pursuing farmland, port infrastructure, and logistics networks across multiple continents.
China's leaders understand that securing corn is not a matter of passively buying on the open market. It requires reshaping the global agricultural landscape. Facing rising domestic demand and geopolitical uncertainty, Beijing has built a sophisticated, multi-layered system to guarantee long-term access to grain. This strategy goes far beyond simple land purchases. It is an integrated model involving farmland, logistics, ports, infrastructure, and political agreements designed to make the global flow of corn more predictable and more aligned with China's interests. Below are the 5 core mechanisms defining China's expanding agricultural footprint. China's most visible tool is its growing network of farmland holdings overseas. Through state-owned companies, private firms, and joint ventures, Beijing has acquired or leased significant tracts of agricultural land across Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and parts of Eastern Europe. Countries such as Mozambique, Tanzania, Ukraine before the war, Brazil, Laos, and Argentina have seen large-scale Chinese agricultural projects emerge. These holdings allow China to bypass market volatility, secure production directly at the source, and shape crop choices toward strategic priorities such as corn and soybeans. For China, owning or controlling farmland abroad is not colonial-style expansion. It is a form of supply chain insurance. China's global strategy extends deep into infrastructure that moves agricultural commodities. By investing in ports, deep-water terminals, railway hubs, and grain-loading facilities, China ensures reliable logistics even during global disruptions. Examples include strategic port stakes in Brazil's northeast and south, major port concessions in Argentina and Peru, and investments across West and East Africa. Control of these choke points allows China to influence shipping schedules, reduce transportation costs, and secure priority access to outbound cargoes. In a world where logistics disruptions can spike prices overnight, China's presence in global ports acts as a buffer, enabling grain to flow even during crises.
Rather than building an agricultural trading empire from scratch, China has opted to partner with, and in some cases, partially acquire, major global grain traders. Chinese companies collaborate extensively with giants like COFC International, Louis Dreyfus, and regional exporters in Brazil and the Black Sea. These alliances provide access to origination markets, storage systems, shipping fleets, and real-time intelligence on crop conditions. By embedding itself within these trading networks, China gains the ability to shape flows, negotiate long-term contracts, and avoid dependence on U.S.-based agribusiness powerhouses such as ADM, Cargill, and Bunge. A central feature of China's global agricultural expansion is its willingness to finance large-scale infrastructure that developing countries cannot build alone. Railways, highways, silos, dams, and port modernization projects are frequently funded or constructed by Chinese firms. In exchange, China often receives preferential access to export volumes, long-term supply agreements, or discounted logistics services. In Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, entire export corridors have been shaped by Chinese financing. These projects are not charity. They are strategic investments that lock in predictable flows of corn and other crops for decades to come. Finally, China relies on government-to-government agreements to secure fixed volumes of agricultural imports. These deals often include multi-year purchase commitments, investment incentives, and political cooperation. Brazil has signed long-term agricultural supply accords with Beijing. Argentina and Kazakhstan have similar arrangements. Even during global disruptions, droughts, trade disputes, or shipping crises, these agreements guarantee China priority access to grain. This reduces exposure to spot market volatility and ensures Beijing can plan industrial and food systems with greater certainty.
As China expands its agricultural footprint, many producer nations now rely on Chinese financing to build ports, railways, storage, and processing capacity. This financial dependence gradually limits their policy autonomy. Countries that depend on Chinese loans or joint ventures often adjust export rules, prioritize Chinese buyers, or grant long-term leases as part of strategic agreements. Over time, the ability to independently decide what to grow, how to price it, or whom to sell it to becomes constrained by external interests. What begins as investment turns into structural influence. China's growing demand for corn and feed grains fuels intense competition for fertile land. As Chinese companies buy or lease acreage across Africa, Latin America, and Eastern Europe, land values rise and availability decreases. Local farmers face higher costs, while governments must balance foreign investment with domestic food needs. This global land race affects food security. More productive acres shift toward export-oriented supply chains rather than local consumption. As fertile land becomes a strategic asset, nations risk losing control over their own agricultural resources. For decades, the United States dominated global corn trade and controlled many of the world's agricultural logistics networks. China's strategy directly challenges that leadership. By developing export corridors in Brazil, Argentina, and Africa, and expanding port capacity in key regions, Beijing reduces reliance on U.S. suppliers. Each new route weakens the centrality of the Mississippi River system and U.S. grain traders. As China diversifies away from American producers, the U.S. loses pricing power, geopolitical leverage, and the ability to shape global agricultural flows. U.S. policymakers interpret China's agricultural expansion not as business, but as a deliberate geopolitical strategy to bypass American influence. This perception intensifies trade tensions, prompting tariffs, export restrictions, and scrutiny of Chinese agribusiness investments in the U.S. The competition extends to Latin America and Africa, where both nations seek influence over infrastructure, commodities, and agricultural development. As a result, corn is increasingly tied to diplomatic negotiations, national security debates, and economic rivalry between the world's two largest powers.
When a single geopolitical actor gains control over large portions of the global corn supply chain, from farmland to ports to shipping routes, the world becomes more vulnerable to disruption. Political tension, supply shocks, or policy changes in China can affect dozens of countries at once. Concentrated control reduces global resilience and increases the risk that food, intentionally or not, becomes a tool of political leverage. In an interconnected world, the stability of global food supplies becomes tied to the strategic decisions of one dominant nation.